Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's great. We was 60 degrees in central Ohio on President's Day. So I took my daughter out to work on her softball pitching and her softball hitting down at the field. And I woke up on Tuesday morning like, why does my shoulder hurt? It's like, oh, because you haven't pitched a softball in, I don't know, 5 months or so when you threw like 200 pitches without really properly stretching yesterday. Like, that might have something to do with it, maybe. I mean, I don't know, Tony. I'm not a doctor. How are you?
Fast pitch?
Yes, fast pitch, but I am... my technique is not particularly refined, so I just move the screen like they do with batting practice in the majors. I just move the screen closer, so I don't have to throw it that hard. But it gets on her in the appropriate amount of time.
All right. Just feels like you could have tried harder. That's all I'm saying. No, it was nice yesterday. Me and the neighbors were all just running around celebrating fall spring. It's just and then to hear the thunderstorms at night, just a wonderful thing. Love it. Nothing like it. And then you see that in like 2 or 3 days, it's going to be in the 30s again, but that's okay. That's fine. It's still technically February. I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to be beaten. I know last week you were saying winter is over. Tom, it is not over. It'll let you be over, but it is not over now. What is almost over, Tom, is your list and your list alone of the 30 most exciting Ohio State games of the 2000s. Tom, we went through 30 through 21 of your list on Monday's Morning Scoop, and then went through 20 through 11 of your list on Monday's Buckeye Weekly. And so here we are finishing up numbers 10 through 11, the 10 through 1, the 10 most exciting Ohio State games, according to Tom Orr, at Tom Orr4 on Twitter, of the 2000s. And this first one, Tom, I'll let you go, is that's a pretty exciting one. I'll give you that. It's certainly a top 10er.
Yeah, and before we get started, do you want to tell people how you put this list together? Because this is your list that you compiled. No.
Well, actually, Tom, why don't you tell them how you put this list together, and then also, I need a 10.5 because I forgot.
Well, here's the thing. One of the games on this list, generally, the way I put this list together was I looked at closeness of games, competitiveness of games. Was this game? If this game was, the 2008 Ohio State-Michigan game, like it's an Ohio State-Michigan game, this is very exciting, but Ohio State wins 42-7. So was that particularly exciting? No, that game was over about midway through the second quarter. So no, that was not particularly exciting. So that game does not make this list. The importance of the game makes the list. Sometimes Ohio State loses close games. That is the thing that happens. So this list may not reflect your views if you only feel exciting games are games that Ohio State wins. That's fine too. That's okay. There's one on this list that is one of the most significant, one of the most memorable games, but it wasn't necessarily exciting in the close score kind of ways. I'm adding it to this list because I know people will have kittens if I don't have this on the list. So I'm putting it on there. And there is some context in which the breadth of the margin of victory was significant enough that that provided some drama in and of itself. So I'm going to allow it. It's going from off the list to a number 3A. So we'll get there in a little bit, but we'll get there. But yeah, this is not necessarily, this will not reflect everyone's views, and that's fine. And frankly, going through it again, I'm not sure if this entirely reflects my views. Like there's some towards the end of the list. It's like I could have put that off and put someone else on.
It's your list.
We may do a morning scoop later on in the week where Tony tells me, here's all the stuff you got wrong, you dummy. And, here's like 10 more you should have had on there instead. So, and you know what? That's a perfectly viable answer. But let's get to number 10. Number 10, the 2013 Michigan game. And it was not the best played game from an Ohio State perspective. They won eventually by that much. This was a game that we were visiting family down in Texas. So I was on an airplane flying back for the first half of this game. And because we wanted to get a direct flight, and it was like, well, okay, we'll get the direct flight and we'll be home by like halftime and it'll be okay. It'll be all right. I won't be. And then the flight got delayed a little bit. And so I missed pretty much the first 2.5 quarters of this game. So it was a little, this is one of the rare Ohio State Michigan games. This might be the only Ohio State Michigan game in the last 30 years that I haven't seen live in its entirety. But Tony, this one turned out to be a pretty memorable one.
Yeah, this was, obviously it's the 42-41 win for Ohio State, with Michigan going for 2 at the end and Devin Gardner throwing the interception to Tyvis Powell. Michigan scores with 32 seconds left to get that opportunity to tie or win. And this is definitely a weird one. And for one, the fact that the game only took 3 hours and 32 minutes and
for 83 points,
83 points is insane. I don't know. Maybe they forgot to sell commercials that day, but you have Ohio State punted 3 times and they only had 8 third downs. They had over 500 yards of total offense, but Braxton Miller, 6 of 15 passing, 133 yards. But you did have Carlos Hyde rushing for 226 yards and Braxton rushing for 153 yards, and they controlled the clock and controlled a lot of the game, at least in terms of not falling behind. And then even open up the third quarter, 2 touchdowns to take a 35-21 lead. You're feeling good. And then Michigan comes right back to tie it with 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And then Ohio State goes 65 yards for the game, eventually game-winning touchdown. They score with 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. Devin Gardner goes right down the field and gets that touchdown to eventually try to win. Gardner, 451 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, playing on he was banged up as well. And just this was a game that I think impressed a lot of Ohio State fans, and a lot of everybody who watched this walked away thinking that was an incredible performance by Devin Gardner. And also, why doesn't he normally play like that?
Yeah, that was that was a game where if Michigan had played like that all season, Michigan would have had a very different season than they did. They ended up in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. The real punchline to this story is not they threw an interception on a 2-point conversion at the end of the Ohio State game and lost. The real punchline of the story is they played Kansas State in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, which is, then turned into the Cheez-It Bowl. Look at my Cheez-It Bowl. Pull over a thing. Oh, wrong side. Yes. So yeah, it turned into the Cheez-It Bowl and it turned into whatever else it is. The second, the poor man's Fiesta Bowl, basically, the game that they play in the baseball stadium in Arizona. They are down, it was like 31-6 or something like that to Kansas State with like 2 minutes left. The game has been over. The season has functionally been over for, a quarter and a half. And then I think they ran the Philly special. It was like a halfback pass for a 2-point conversion after they scored a real late touchdown that was completely meaningless. So it's like you had this completely unstoppable play in your playbook for a 2-point conversion, and you ran it in this completely meaningless situation against Kansas State in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl instead of running it in the game-deciding play against Ohio State. That was anyway, Brady Hoke, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, that was a game that was really exciting. I mean, Ohio State ran for 8.5 yards per rush. They outrushed Michigan by 4.3 yards per rush. Michigan outpassed Ohio State by just 0.7 yards per pass, and then somehow they still came right down to the wire. This one looked for all the world at the end of the third quarter like Ohio State was going to run away with it. They're up 35-21, and they had a couple turnovers. Carlos had a fumble, and it turned the game around and turned it into a really, again, not the best played game, but a classic, and one that people are going to remember for sure. One you're going to see that Tyvis Powell interception on every Ohio State Michigan pregame hype video you will see from now until the end of time. So and
that one was where Kerry Combs told them that was the play that's going to happen. This is going to be their play. Tyvis is what you're going to do.
Yeah,
and Tyvis did that. The week before, Devin Gardner threw for 98 yards and a loss to Iowa. This game would have been much bigger in terms of after the fact if Michigan hadn't come into the game with 4 losses already. And it was just like a very good Ohio State team playing not a great Michigan team, and somehow it was this was one of those where Urban Meyer got the reputation for just, he always beats Michigan. Many of his wins they should not have been as close because he was playing some not great Michigan teams. And yet you still had this one that came down to one play to win or lose, and should have never come to that.
And this one's probably a couple slots higher on the list if they don't lose to Michigan State the following week, because then you're potentially playing for a national championship. But yeah, this was the Luke Fickell "did we win" game, and then the answer the next week was no. In fact, you did not, for much the same reason as you almost did not win the week before that. So that's the 2013 Michigan game. Number 9. This is one. This is not. This was a big game at the time. This was number 2 Penn State against number 6 Ohio State, 2017, and this was Ohio State had lost to Oklahoma earlier in the year, but they're 7-1. Penn State 7-1. Penn State comes in. This is a Saquon Barkley game, and I'm down on the field before the game, and then I'm shooting pictures and the team running out of the tunnel, all that stuff, and I go across the stadium. I'm up in the elevator. And just as the elevator doors open in the press box, I hear this like roar, and I'm like, what is going on? And Saquon Barkley had run back the opening kickoff for a touchdown, which Ohio State's kickoff coverage that year was poor, and Saquon Barkley's kickoff returns that year were not poor. So that was a moment of great decision making in Ohio State football history, kicking to Saquon Barkley. And then they score again, and it's 14-0 Penn State, not even 4 minutes into the game. And then it's 21-3 Penn State early in the second quarter. And then it's 28-10 Penn State halfway through the second quarter. And then Ohio State starts coming back a little bit. It's 28-10. It's like, man, they're not going to stop this team all game. And then they started stopping the team. And very, very late in the game, this went from, this is the Saquon Barkley game to, oh, this is the JT Barrett game. Oh, I see. And this was one of the most exciting games just in terms of like pure... again, this is one that didn't end up meaning anything because the week after this, Ohio State went to Iowa, and how'd that go? And oh well, we're out of time. So, but this was a game that was really dramatic, and it was like there was this weird energy in the stadium. I remember being down on the field and turning to you after the game, and being like, like 5 minutes left in the game, as Ohio State's trying to come back, and just being like, it is like this weird, angry energy because there were a couple calls that went against Ohio State that were like not great. And, it felt like Ohio State was climbing uphill all game, and they finally get there. They score the winning touchdown with 1:48 left and win 39-38, completing this really dramatic comeback. Outscored Penn State 19-3 in the fourth quarter to pull out the win. But yeah, this was one that I will always remember standing on the field and being like, this is like the crowd is so excited, but they're so angry. And it's like, this is just like a little unsettling on the field right now.
And this is another where things are happening on our side of the field when we're down on the field. Mm-hmm. And you just, you see it happening right like in front of you, field level, and just incredible. As loud as I've ever heard the stadium after, I think it was what the Johnny Dixon touchdown to take the lead, and then, or to get within a touchdown, and obviously the Marcus Ball one, but just these are the ones that, because Ohio State had this game was over essentially. Mm-hmm. Ohio State doesn't normally come back like this, score 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Penn State gets, it's 35-27 early in the fourth, and you're thinking, okay, Ohio State, this is, they've got a chance, and then Penn State kicks a field goal with 5:42 to play to make it a 2-score game, and you're like, well, it was fun while it lasted, and then they go down in 1:17 and score a touchdown, and then they get the ball back and go down in 1:19 and score another touchdown. And yeah, it got to that point where Penn State had no answer. The crowd, like you said, it was it was very loud. It was a very animated Ohio State Penn State game, and Ohio State turned it over sometimes. They had a couple of fumbles, and it just frustrating throughout. And the thing is, like, they held Saquon Barkley to like 44 yards rushing on 20 carries, 21 carries, like maybe like 30 yards receiving. It was just that one kickoff return, and it immediately just set the tone. Like, why would you do this? And they were playing from behind the entire way after that, and they just kept coming. And then after that game, you're like, well, JT Barrett's now, because I remember writing JT Barrett's now in the Heisman race. You got to put him in there. And like you said, then they go to Iowa, and I just completely unraveled and completely disproved everything I had written the week before.
Yeah, they scored touchdowns on their last 2 drives with JT Barrett throwing touchdown passes. And then on their first drive of the Iowa game, someone also scored a touchdown with JT Barrett throwing a pass on the opening drive of the game. So let's not ask any details and let's just move on. But yeah, no, that was a very, very, very exciting game. And that was, there are a lot of times you're down on the field at the end of the game and it's just kind of, they're running out the clock. But when you were down there and it's like, you can feel the intensity. You can always feel the intensity on the sidelines when it's a close game. Mm-hmm. You don't that often. It's like once or twice a year. It's a real close game. And you can really feel the intensity in the stadium. That was definitely one of those. Number 8. This was another one. This is I feel like this one goes a little bit underappreciated in terms of like greatest games in Ohio State history, just because it was very early in the season. And it was a non-conference game, and this is not an Ohio State team that went on to win a national championship. So I feel like this one goes a little under the radar. But number 24, North Carolina State, and number 3, Ohio State in 2003. It was about 100 million degrees in the stadium that day. And this was, you mentioned the Michigan game that went very short, shorter than you'd expected. I'm going to see if I can find a run time on this one. But
4:17.
4:17, yes. There it is, yes. Game ended at it was a noon kickoff. It ended at 4:29 p.m. And that's because the game went triple overtime. This is one that I think is going to go, whenever you put together the list of the best opposing quarterback performances in Ohio Stadium, the older folks will mention John Elway and Stanford in the early 80s. Mm. The people in their, the people in their 60s will say that. The people in their 40s are going to mention this one. And then, you've got some others recently, but man, Phillip Rivers it was not a fantastic game through 3 quarters. It was 17-7 Ohio State through 3 quarters. And they actually had a 24-7 lead early in the 4th quarter. And then North Carolina State comes back, touchdown with 8:26 left, field goal with 5:51 left, touchdown with 21 seconds left, 8 plays, 86 yards, 257. They go right down the field on an absolute do or die touchdown drive at the end of regulation. Ohio State gets the ball first in overtime, scores a touchdown. North Carolina State answers. North Carolina State scores a touchdown in the top of the 2nd overtime. Ohio State answers. Ohio State scores a touchdown in the top of the 3rd overtime. And then T.A. McClendon, they missed the 2-point conversion, so they had to get a stop for North Carolina State, or NC State could have potentially kicked or gone for a game-winning 2-point conversion. And T.A. McClendon gets stopped. Was it by Will Allen? I think it was.
Yes.
Yep. When in doubt, just assume that Will Allen made the big game-saving play back then. But T.A. McClendon gets stopped about 6 inches short of the goal line. He's trying to back in. It ended up 48-38 or 44-38. It was, this was a great Jim Tressel game where the Ohio State averaged 1.4 yards per rush. North Carolina State averaged 0.7 yards per rush. But Phillip Rivers, 36 of 52, 315 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. But when the game was on the line at the end, it was just boom, 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 like 4 touchdowns in a row. Very, very impressive. This I think is one of the more underappreciated games when you're kind of just off the top of your head, you're thinking about, you're making a list in your head. This is not one that should, necessarily pops in your mind, but to me, this is one that belongs right near the top of the list.
Yeah, and I remember when the Big Ten Network came to be in 2007, and they're going to start showing all of these old games. And for years and years, they wouldn't. I just kept wanting them to show this game. Let people see this game again, because this one was amazing. And now I'm looking at it, and I'm surprised that Phillip Rivers only threw for 315 yards, because no, he was very, I don't want to say legendary, but certainly memorable. And he's a guy that, like you said, Buckeye fans put him up there because they remember how, he was harassed. He was, Darian Scott, I think, had 2 sacks. Tim Anderson had 2 sacks. They were getting after him, and he was getting the ball out really quickly, really accurately. T.A. McClendon came into this game, was really, really good running back. Had some injury issues, but was performing well. They pretty much shut him down. 32 yards rushing, like you said. Will Allen stopped him. When you say 6 inches, you might be generous there. I mean, it was really close. His long run on the day was 27 yards. Obviously, finished with 32 yards. To give you an idea of how good that 2003 defense was. The other thing that I don't know if people today, like the kids out there today, realize, Ohio State and North Carolina State were competing against each other on a recruiting trail as well. Mm-hmm. Like this was a different era of North Carolina State football, and Richard Washington, the receiver for North Carolina State, was a one-time OSU commit, and North Carolina State really had some talent. They had some really good offensive talent, really good receivers, and then, of course, T.M. McClendon. And this was, you look at the numbers, and you're like, Ohio State puts up barely 317 yards of total offense in 3 overtimes. And like, how is that possible? Then you remember, it's Jim Tressel, and that's all it takes. I mean, North Carolina State put up 336. So, but still an incredible game, incredible performance by Phillip Rivers. And let's not, Craig Krenzel threw 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Both quarterbacks give and take, but yeah, Phillip Rivers, when they needed to have it, he seemed to always have the play.
Yeah, that was just, it wasn't, CJ Stroud in the Rose Bowl, and don't worry, we'll get there in a second, but it was a different era of football where, the expectations were a little different. You're not running, no one's running hurry up. This is, okay, we're going to get in a huddle. We're going to snap the ball with 7 seconds left on the play clock. And so, the stats now don't look that remarkable, but just the drama of the game of, just, they were down 3 scores in the fourth quarter, and he got them 3 scores, and then he scored in the first overtime, and then he scored in the second overtime, and then they very nearly scored in the third overtime. I mean, and that was, as you said, a very, very, very good Ohio State defense. So to put up 31 points in the span of like 5 drives, that's pretty remarkable. So, and that was not the first 5 drives. That was the game on the line, on the road, against number 3. And I mean, this was a major, major game. And they played the next year in Raleigh, and that was another game that got a lot of hype that then, both teams kind of fell apart, so it didn't look as big in retrospect, but it was a big game at the time. So, yeah, that was a series that I think is a little underappreciated in Ohio State history. Just those 2 teams it doesn't look as big looking back on it as it was at the time. Next one, number 7, the 2022 Rose Bowl against Utah. You probably remember this game a little bit, but I mean, if this had playoff stakes, this, or was earlier in the season and, Ohio State's still in the national championship race, this might be number 2 on the list. If this was not a game that was, they're out of they haven't won the Big Ten, they're out of the national championship picture. Just the stakes of it, it's a little lower. But man, this game, that was one of the most, it reminded me a little bit of the Penn State game where it was like, well, they're dead, they're done, it's not going to happen. You've kind of written the game off, and then they come roaring back, and it's a really, really dramatic finish. That was, again, I'm sure I don't need to remind people of that game. It just happened a month and a half ago, but this is one that is, it might be lower rather than too high because of recency bias. That this might end up being remembered even more fondly than it is right now.
The second quarter of this game was just haymaker after haymaker. And it starts with the Marvin Harrison 25-yard touchdown. Then Utah scores again. And then CJ Stroud gets a 50-yarder from Jackson Smith and Jigba. Then the kickoff return for a touchdown. Then another 52-yarder for Njigba. And then Cameron Rising breaks free and runs for 62 yards. And like Ohio State kept getting the momentum, getting it back to a touchdown. And then Utah would make this crazy big play, kickoff return, a quarterback scramble. And the entire time you're thinking, well, if you just stop the stupid stuff, then you should be able to run away with it. And then eventually, not that they ran away with it, but they were able to contain Utah a little bit. And then where do the individual performances rank in terms of excitement? Because what Jackson Smith and Jigba did, what CJ Stroud did, Does certainly those are two of the best performances I've ever seen in person, and we got to see the Trey Sermon one. We've seen obviously these two, which I think could match up with any other individual great performances in Ohio State history. 573 yards passing for C.J. Stroud, 6 touchdowns, the 1 interception. Then, of course, the crazy record-breaking 15 catches, 347 yards for Jackson Smith-Njigba with 3 touchdowns. I don't think it's crazy to say we saw two of the best individual performances in Ohio State football history, maybe two of the 4 best individual performances of all time.
Yeah,
offensively.
I think you're exactly right. And you go back to the Trey Sermon game. I mean, we've probably seen 3 of the 4 greatest in the last 2 seasons, like not even like basically one season worth of games. And you've seen 2, the greatest single game passing record, the single game rushing record, the single game receiving record. Like, yep, that's pretty good. You go through the box score and there's just so many wows. I mean, you talked about the individual ones, but here's one. In the span of 1 minute and 5 seconds of the second quarter, 28 points were scored. Each team scored 2 touchdowns in 1 minute 5. Davion Thomas scores a 6-yard touchdown to make it 21-7 Utah with 9:07 left. Then 50-yard, 2 plays, 60 yards. Jackson Smith-Njigba, 50-yard touchdown pass from C.J. Stroud. That was 35 seconds later. 15 seconds later, Britton Covey runs back a touchdown, 97 yards. 15 seconds after that, first play of the drive, Jackson Smith-Njigba, 52-yard pass from C.J. Stroud, like just haymaker after haymaker after haymaker, and it just kept going, and then it was, so you had the excitement of the game, plus you had the comeback from Ohio State, plus you had, there was a little bit of a seesaw there where it was like, okay, Ohio State has, they were down 35-21 at the half, they score a touchdown, they give up a field goal with a kick a field goal, so it's 38-31 at the end of the third quarter. Ohio State scores a touchdown to tie it. Ohio State scores a touchdown to take the lead with 4:22 left. At this point, it's been half the game, and Wisconsin, in the last 30 minutes of the game, Utah has scored 3 points. So it's like, okay, now it's over. And then they've got a backup quarterback in. It's like, okay, so now this is definitely over. And then they go 6 plays, 57 yards for a touchdown to tie the score at 45-45 with 1:54 left. And if Ohio State fans weren't jumping off the roof at that point, the rest of them were going, oh, too much time. And they were right. Ohio State goes down the field, 7 plays, 56 yards, and Noah Ruggles kicks a 19-yard field goal with 9 seconds left to win at 48-45. And just to make sure, you did have that one extra moment of drama where it's like, oh, good, Britton Covey has the ball in his hands. What could possibly go wrong? Okay. They got him to the ground. All right, good. Now it's done, and now everyone can relax. But that was, you think back to the great Rose Bowls. There was the Georgia-Oklahoma one in the college football playoff semifinal, which just kind of doesn't quite feel canon because it's not a Big Ten team and a Pac-12 team. But you had the USC Penn State one a few years ago that was like 52-49. That was very much this same kind of game. And this was right up there with the very, very best Rose Bowls. And there have been a lot of Rose Bowls, and this was right up there with the very best of them. So yeah, I think this is one that is going to continue to age well, I think.
And give credit to Emeka Egbuka with a 33-yard kickoff return to propel them on that final drive, because they got the ball with 147 to play at their own 42. And you got a couple of three passes, a couple of runs, and boom, you're inside the 5, and started with that Emeka Egbuka kickoff return.
Yeah, and in an era where kickoff returns are basically a forgotten part of the game, Britton Covey had one for a touchdown for Utah. Emeka Egbuka had a long one that got called back for Ohio State, and then he had another one that was almost as long that stood for Ohio State that set up that winning field goal. So it was just, there was a little bit of excitement on pretty much every kind of play you could possibly have during the course of the game. Next one, number 6, the 2005 Texas game, and this is not one that Ohio State fans will remember real fondly, but this was about as big of a non-conference game as you can remember in Columbus. I mean, this was huge. Number 2 Texas, number 4 Ohio State, massive, massive game. I mean, these were two teams that you knew were going to be great. That played, they didn't play great at the start. They were, Ohio State was still trying to figure itself out. Troy Smith had been suspended for the season opener. because of the cell phone thing. So he missed a little bit of time. So they were still kind of juggling quarterbacks, and Ohio State still kind of had this one in their grasp. And then Vince Young comes back and wins the game at the very end. This one felt like, this felt like a titanic struggle. And a lot of times these early season games where it's like, two top 5 teams, one of them turns out to be kind of like, they ended the season number 23. Like, no, these were 2 legit national championship caliber teams swinging as hard as they could back and forth. You've got all the great what ifs on the Ryan Hamby catch, and what if they had just played Troy Smith from the start and all that. There's so many great what ifs on this one, but in the end, it was the guy who won the Heisman Trophy, who won the national championship, leading his team down the field, 7 plays, 67 yards for the game-winning touchdown with 2:37 left. That was a. This is another one of those. It wasn't, the most incredible shootout or anything, but it was 2 really, really good teams just going as hard as they possibly could at each other.
This was the biggest game of the year, and there was build-up all summer long. I remember listening to Colin Cowherd during lunch one day, and this is a really odd memory, but just talking about this game, saying there's no way Ohio State is going to lose to Texas at home. The game is too big. Ohio State obviously will win. One of the crazy things, so Josh Houston, Ohio State kicker, makes 5 field goals, misses a 6th. Tom, have you looked at these scoring drives for Ohio State?
I was just pulling that up because I thought, this is a bit of a cautionary tale about kicking too many stupid field goals because here we go. Yes.
This is outrageous.
Yes. Here's Ohio State's scoring drives. Field goal, 5 plays, 8 yards. Then scored a touchdown, 9 plays, 80 yards. Oh, that's a good drive. Field goal, 4 plays, -1 yards. Field goal, 9 plays, 22 yards. Field goal, 6 plays, 11 yards. Field goal, 7 plays, 45 yards. Missed field goal, 11 plays, 37 yards. Like, it just, they had 1 drive longer than 45 yards all game. 2 drives longer than 37 yards all game. It's not great. I mean, and in Texas, it wasn't like Texas was moving up and down the field either. They had a 64-yard drive and an 84-yard drive. They're up 10-zip in the first quarter. It was like, uh-oh. And then the rest of the drive, 13 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards, 34 yards, 3 yards, 72, 3, 25, 67, 29, -3. That's it. I mean, this was not an incredible, an incredible offensive performance by any means. And, this was very much an Ohio State team that was still trying to figure out what it was. But, there is a real interesting alternate history where Ryan Hamby catches that touchdown pass. They win this game. Even if they lose to Penn State later in the year, they still probably get the BCS nod over Texas on a head-to-head. So then they get to go play that great USC team. And, this Ohio State team was firing on all cylinders at the end of the year. Mm. And, they played a pretty decent Notre Dame team and just killed them. That was another one that probably just barely missed this list. But that was a team that had some big play potential and they were sort of figuring out what they were at the end of that year. So yeah, there are a couple real good what ifs on this one.
The way the defense harassed Vince Young, like you come into this game and a lot of the talk is just what an amazing athlete Vince Young is. And then you watch AJ Hawk and like Bobby Carpenter, they're like chasing him down and making his life miserable. And then he still comes through at the end, just gives you that's another one where I think Ohio State people walk away saying, okay, Vince Young's pretty good. And they held him in check, like 70 yards rushing. And I don't think he went crazy throwing the ball because that wasn't his game. 270 yards, but that touchdown at the end to Lima Swede. I remember back in the day, there's probably a list of like 9 things that went wrong for Ohio State that if just one of them hadn't, they were going to win this game. Was there like an Austin Spittler hit out of bounds at some point on a return or something like that? There were just a bunch of little things that happened that if one of those hadn't, and time has gone by now, so I don't remember all of them. But looking back on this one, it was a huge game. I think this one has lost some luster based on we see shinier football now, Tom, and this it was a big game, but then you look at how it actually played out and you're like, well, it's kind of it's certainly not pretty. you know?
No, it was definitely not a beautiful game by any means, but it was also, I mean, two great teams. Like we're going to have another one of these games in a couple spots on this list where it's two great, like unquestionably great teams playing a really good dramatic game that went a full 60 minutes. And, like I said, this was not the Notre Dame Texas game a couple of years ago where it was a season opener, and I don't even remember who won. Whoever won was like, oh man, they're back. They are going, and it turned out like, oh, both of these teams are actually kind of crap, but we just didn't know it yet. It was, this was the early season game that delivered in terms of being a competitive game, and also delivered in terms of both of those teams like living up to pretty much all of the hype that year. I think they both finished in the top 5 as well. I mean, that was just a really, really good game. And it was, I remember sitting in that game and there were Texas fans near me, and it was, the whole game, you're just like, everyone's so tense in there. At the end of the game, it was just like, you tip your cap, as they say. Like, it's just like, yeah, that was a hell of a game. I don't know what to tell you. That was a really, really, really good win. So yeah, that was not all of those non-conference games live up to the hype. That one definitely did.
And down to the wire was an exciting one. Tom, I'm wondering, should we stop right now? We are 35 minutes in, and we are exactly halfway through this list.
Yes, well, I guess we should stop right now. And we're not really halfway through this list because there's
exactly
we have 7 more. So yes, we apparently need to stop. And good news, you get more podcasts this week. Huzzah!
We'll stop on a downer right in the middle of this, just like Avengers Endgame. Tom, I know you know that reference.
Yeah, no spoilers. I don't know.
So that will then do it. I love that we leave people on a loss of Tom's list. And then I don't even know when we're going to get back to recording. This might be the only show we have for a couple of weeks. We're just going to leave you with this Texas loss right in your face. No, we will have an episode for you tomorrow or the day after. Certainly, because I don't want to just hang on the words of this Texas loss. So that will do it for us today. Thank you all for joining. My sincere apologies. If this has upset you, that was not my intent. That was Tom's intent. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching, and we will talk to you later.